And welcome back to the Talk Past podcast. Of course, we don't say that 10 times fast too often. I am here, of course, your host, NC, with a guest.
You can refer to me as the Bruce, since
Mm,
that's best where you know me from, so it'll be
Indeed.
easier that way.
Indeed. So, in regards to that, let's actually start off because I have a couple questions that I like to ask kind of everybody in this sort of new bit that I've been doing. We had Zach on last week, CK, and I kind of asked him about some of the characters and things that he did in relation to medieval history. So obviously we started, or well, at least I was introduced to you when for the medieval fair we did Cressy Year.
The
Um,
start of the Hundred Years' War.
Indeed. Uh, did you have any sort of relation or knowledge or interest in like medieval history or reenactment beforehand, or did you just kind of come in with the group that brought you in?
I've always been kind of a history nerd, not necessarily delving so far back into the medieval for quite some period of time, but basically I got into doing this when we met by an old friend who had been doing this sort of thing with the fairs since I went to high school. We went to high school together, and he offered me a chance to come and take part in what I would encourage anyone to try. It will really take you outside of your box on several areas, between your skills at working with other people, skills at talking to other people, and the history behind what has shaped everything that we see today. It's just fantastic. But I know I'm getting off that where I was going with that. But he offered me the opportunity to come in. He knew I had an outgoing personality, and that's all she wrote at this point.
Indeed, indeed. Yeah, recalling that time. And of course, you and I can divulge in unnecessary tales from then. But uh, we did Cressy Year. The more years transpire between times, the more you forget the nitty gritty details. But I think that was not just the Hundred Years' War. I'm not talking and referring to Cressy, but that was the year where you pretty much had to do. You were playing a character that was very much armored up and was very obviously he was a lord of Mayaka, or what was the precise name and title?
I was King James II, the King of Majorca, which would
King,
have been Spain today.
indeed, and I make sure I'd never have an orca because I do not like orcas. But
Oh, they're terribly mean.
oh yeah, they
Wolves
are
of the sea.
exactly. People don't realize that. That's why they call them whale killers instead of killer whales, and
Hmm.
that's why you should never touch them. But in any case, um, so let's divulge a little bit on that character, or of course the actual person, and then your portrayal of the character, because we all find some way to make it our own. But once you have a character that's given to you, assuming when you do a show like this, you're given a character. Um, what was did you know anything beforehand, or once you got him, what did you do to sort of prepare and kind of look up on him?
So I was given the character really without any background to it. That's very, you and I both know that's very typical to when we inherit an actual historical character. It is a duck shoot on what we can actually find out about them. Um, I, of course, went into research mode and did my best through every possible source, including different types of forums, Wikipedia, bought books by experts on what actually happened during that time period so I could get more of an idea on who this person was. There was so little information. Actually, I've played characters which had even less information, but there was so little information on this character, with the exception of the fact that he was beloved. Um, his his he actually went into this war with Philip to provide money for his own people so they didn't have to pay taxes. He was very much about taking care of his people and educating his people. One of the interesting things is one of the other characters present there, who is no longer with us today as a person. Um, he was playing John the Blind Bohemia, and the
Yeah.
two of them worked together to create the real, which was the standardized trade currency of the time, which there was really no standardized trade currency to try to better efforts between them, or between them and other trading factions. He went into that war and he died in that war protecting Philip. And when he died, his son, his oldest son, who had been wanting to go on campaign with him for all of his life and never got a chance to go with his father, was so hurt and so distraught that he joined the church and never spoke again. So, and then his youngest son had taken over at the time, and then it went on from there. But even getting into the idea of that character, something at the time that was kind of unheard of were really these monarchs that cared for their people. It's a strange thing to do because most of it, the people were nothing but a political pawn in this game between like two or three families that had dispersed their family lines across continents.
Yeah.
So it was really nice for me to know enough about the character and know enough about the character's attitude to then find pieces within myself that I could correlate to how that person would have been and mix them with the information I had.
Exactly, which is usually very little. Sometimes is a lot, but I referenced this literally in the last episode with Zach, just in regards to some weapons. But sometimes when we do this, a historical reenactment, whether it's a character, a weapon, or something, sometimes there's literally all of just a sentence to go off on, like just trying to find info on things, especially if it's not in England, Scotland, Ireland, France, Europe, anything of that sort of embodiment of regions. If it's anything outside of that, is very difficult. So it's kind of weird. I'm trying to, for the Discord itself, but also all of us that do this on our Discord as a resource, try to pull together as many manuals and stuff that we could use, but it's also very difficult. I wonder if it's a means of maybe not enough is written down about the person at the time, or if a lot of volumes were destroyed, or if maybe it's just because there's a language barrier. Not that people in Spain wouldn't be able to read it and transcribe and that such, but like I could pick up a manual from Germany. That doesn't mean I read German.
Right, and there are many different pieces of surviving history that have been very difficult for people to translate project wise. You still have a large amount of the HEMA projects that are translating texts, fight books from the Renaissance and even a little bit prior, where we have learned as much about what I'll term overall as Western fencing. Uh, and even those were locked in prose in a lot of cases, just as a bare guideline, but without the teachings of the actual masters or the schools that taught them, you missed the nuances of what actually was going on, or it didn't exactly come out to be what you think it would be. I happen to be fortunate enough to know several people who have taken these fight books and gone backwards from them to try to recreate what these things say physically to find the maneuvers.
Yeah,
And it's very hard, especially when, like you said before, a language barrier something that is written may translate just subtly to a different bit of, or a different word, which makes it harder to understand.
Right.
And as far as the weapons of time period, you're looking at uh, most of the people today that don't have this love for research or history. They look at any old sword in the shop and think, or sword or axe or club, uh, and they think that because they've seen these things in movies, these are what they use during the time period, or especially armor. I'll go after armor more so than I will anything else. And if you want me to stop to break in, please tell me, because this can be a long discussion.
No, I was gonna. I just saw the new poster for the Green Knight film that's coming out next month, and even on that, it looks like it might be a good movie. Who knows? We'll see. But uh, the Green Knight character is wearing your stereotypical over enormously stitched clothing that looks like it was made by cavemen, and yet obviously back then people were the absolute experts of their crafts, having to hand sew everything that they wore. Probably did it better than we do now, because if they didn't sew so well, then they went starving. But yet on movies, you've got all these, especially Viking stuff. It's a trend on this podcast. Anytime anything Viking comes up, we got to discuss how weird they look in media. But you notice they've got those weird X stitches and all those like over ginormous leather stitchings. It's so ridiculous. But same thing. Everything gets sort of messed up and mixed up in the translation. And not only that, I mean, back then anybody could have written anything. Who's to say that something that someone wrote down or drew as an alleged accounting of an event wasn't false, or even a parody, or something that wasn't even meant to be taken as a literal.
As a something interesting, if you are ever interested to read it, or when we are in the same room again, I will give to you to read. And I'm going to butcher the name off the top of my head, but actually, I'm not going to butcher the name. The translation of the book is called The Three Tailors, and it is based around three different people that tailored during the Renaissance and a little bit before that. And the difference in measurements, because most of them are from the Austrian area, but the difference in measurements they talk about for creating clothing. Like none of the bolts of fabric were ever in the same kind of size. They were never, there was no, well, we're always going to get it, 2 yards by 50 yards long. There was no way that happened. There were 4 or 5 major types of dimensions that you would get these bolts of fabric in. On top of that, these things were so expensive. Thread was so expensive that they didn't waste anything. Nowadays, we waste tons of stuff, even with industrialized sewing and cloth creation. We waste far more than these people did back during those time periods. And if you take an I know SCA master seamstresses or master tailors who they can stitch faster and better than our modernized sewing machines. Sorry. Uh, didn't mean to get off on that, but it was an interesting
Yeah,
point you brought up.
exactly. And then regarding fabric, at least for the King of Majorca, you wore, well, obviously, we all comment on our outfits. I had a weird outfit that year too, but your outfit, was that historical, or was it like a representative of his flag or his colors? How did you come up with his outfit?
It was a
Besides the armor.
it was a representative of the of his crest and his shield.
Mhm.
The colorations were all from there, and I thought it was really interesting that I was termed the Crayola King for that year simply because of all the coloration. But with nobility, color was a thing. There were laws that came in at a certain point in time that said only certain colors could be worn by royals, and we're not talking about, you know, if you get caught wearing red on Sunday, you get a slap on the hand. You were put to death for not following those laws or imprisoned.
Exactly. That's why for a while I maintained that Slytherin look, right? Which,
Well,
of
you
course,
still maintain it.
oh, not as
It's
much.
a
Not as
lifestyle more so for you.
I think I've actually tossed all of my green attire, so now I'm more of the space goth cowboy look. But obviously that year, I was trying to think of while we were talking. Ooh, who was I that year? Was I just random guard? No, I was the weird green dude in the draconic helm that we briefly touched on with Zach because he has one. He has the same helm that I have, um, and that was a thing. Remember, I fought with Tina, and she hit me with the chainmail
The
that she
chainmail
had.
piece.
Hmm. Which would have happened whether I had a helm or not, because she's like, you probably should wear a helm. I'm like, well, I just ordered one, and it's not particularly historical, but it's made of leather.
And I
Um,
really enjoyed that fight. One of
yeah,
the main things about that was the improvisation of the weapon. I think that's something that gets lost a lot of times, at least from the production slash show side of it, because the difference with stage combat versus actual combat, you're there to entertain the crowd, and the crowd can really get behind an improvised weapon.
yeah,
They'll think to themselves, man, I could just pick that up and whack somebody with it like I'm in a bar fight. And those weapons really pull people in. Just my opinion, but I really loved the way that fight moved and flowed, and I thought it was perfect in the use of it, in somebody who should have been untrained, which the character she was playing was, against somebody who legitimately was wearing armor.
mhm. I was in your typical medieval kind of 900s look, um, just chainmail and a leather helm with leather bracers and otherwise. But yeah, it was like a swath of fabric. I think I described it as, and I'm not sure about the accuracy. I think it was just maybe 1 foot by 3 feet. I'm not sure. It wasn't. She was
Sounds
able to
about
wrap that
right.
around. She was able to wrap that around her arm as well. She could have used that as a fist loaded weapon if she wanted. But yeah, no, it's one of my favorite fights. I wish we could have done more and or better, but that's of course hindsight. That was my first fight, and your first fight that year, at least for the first half of the show, was a three-person fight, which is always odd and chaotic. And even in wrestling, a three-person fight's kind of weird and hard to manage. Um, but y'all put it together well enough. But was yours? Because I'm trying to remember, was yours the start of the melee?
Yes. So I
Yeah.
fought all the way through my fight and then went directly into the melee.
Yeah.
That, as a first year, much less fighting two people, because maybe I don't know if you've touched on this subject. What we do is basically like working in a workplace environment, like every other. You're going to have people that you mesh with, and you're going to have people that you don't mesh with, and then you're going to have people that fail you, and then you have to pick up the pieces and continue. The show does not stop simply because something or someone went wrong.
Exactly.
Um, when I started it, it was a two-man fight. It was supposed to be a very serious fight on half of it and a very comedic fight on the other person that I was fighting. At a certain point in time, one of the people ran into a life problem, and we had to deal with the fact that we were now half of that fight, half of that choreography was then gone from the equation. And when both people are fighting me during the entire fight, that's not 30% of the fight gone. That's 50% of the fight gone. We
Yeah.
have a time period that we have to cover. So I really give a lot of a lot of kudos to my fight partner that year that was with me to the end, because we worked hard to put enough together before we went into the melee and have it make sense at the last minute. People who have never done what we do don't realize it's basically pro wrestling with steel weapons. I
Yeah.
was using a blunted sword that weighed about 8 to 10 pounds. If I were to have missed something and followed through on any of those or slipped, which also happened that year thanks to the paint on the board by accident,
Yep.
I could have, at the very least, broken open a skull, crushed bone. I could have killed him. That's not something you take lightly to have to redo 4 hours before you have to perform it.
Exactly. Exactly. Some people don't realize that we use real weapons, and even though the particular show we do, we we choreograph at least for 2 months, because at least 1 month is used up for training. But we choreo for 2 months, and then even though our choreo is usually in slow motion to have speed leading slowly up to performance, which isn't even full speed, which is a full what you would actually be fighting in speed, at least for that time period. You know, if you're swinging swords and axes and shields and stuff in a real fight at the medieval history, we weren't quite that speed. We aren't the speed that you're going to see in movies, but just a hair under, which is still dangerous enough to. And I remember your sword was big and a very heavy sword, at least to me because I'm small. But
No, it was
like that happened.
stage steel makes basically clubs that look like swords.
Yeah, exactly.
They will last forever, but it's heavy. I
It's
don't think I ever used it after that first year. I think it's been sitting in my weapons rack since that year.
Yeah, I used just my generic Paul Chen sword, which I need to get a BKS or something better. But um, the previous, I don't, no, the previous 2 years, my first year, which is the first King Arthur thing we did, which was called Return to Avalon. I don't grasp the concept that we were doing, but King Arthur, whatever. There's a point in the melee where the person that I fought, Cressier, of course, and the person she was with at the time, they were both using. I like to think this was that year. I'm not 100%. It may have been. Forgive me if it's maybe the peasant year. But anyway, at some point in the melee, they were both using bardishes, which is, of course, a polearm. It's a staff. Theirs was of slightly varying length. One was bigger than the other. I think one was like 5 foot. The other was 6 foot. But don't quote me on that. And then, of course, you've got that blade, which is like kind of like a vertical scythe, but thicker in length or width, I should say. Not so much the blade itself. And at some point in the melee, and this is on me because I was new and young, dumb, and full of nonsense. But in the melee, I'm supposed to hop or duck or something with my leg, like lift over or whatever, one of their swings that's coming literally for my legs. Of course, the person that was doing the strike, they come down with both weapons to sort of sandwich me, lift them up. I back off. One of them moves off. The other one, which is not the person that I fought, comes for a leg shot. And then one of the actual show melees, I didn't move my leg because I whatever. Sometimes in the moment or whatever. And but he's an expert, so he's just like, oh, well, okay, I'll just rear back and come back down on you. But we've had moments in our show where people have had weapons lodged inside them or broken things and stuff like that. So any
The
point
great pick through the great pick through the arm incident.
exactly, or someone that literally got um, a halberd into their bone, and then if someone ditches for whatever reason, it could be legit or not. It really doesn't matter. But if you lose a partner, or something has to change, or even spur of the moment changes, things could go horribly wrong. Fortunately for our particular group of individuals and groups of individuals that have gone outside of our group, but have at least worked on our shows, at least nothing has gone to the point of losing limbs or needing to go to the hospital immediately to stop a show. But bones have been broken. Weapons have been lodged, stuff like that. So it's pretty serious what we do. And going a little forward, what I can't remember immediately off the top of my head, but what was the next year? Was that the Scottish year, or did
That
we?
was Magyar year.
Or yeah,
That
that
was
was
the
the Magnar.
character I literally had 2 sentences of history on.
Yep, you were playing Lel,
I was playing
and
Lel.
so you fought. Uh,
I fought the Horka at the time,
mhm,
and then the which was the leader of our group, which is done by a good friend of mine who is also kind of twice my size.
yeah,
And it didn't start out that way. It there's a good friend of ours who is no longer with us, but in
mhm,
spirit, and he and I were going to fight that year, and we had this brilliant fight put together. And then unfortunately, he had a resurgence in his cancer and was not able to and was not able to
yeah,
perform because he had to go back in for treatment. At that point in time, I went to the directors and I said, "Listen, I understand. I don't need to fight this year. My ego is not to the point that I need you to put me in there. I can always fight again next year." So they said, "No, you're going to do a smaller fight with the person who was playing the leader of your side." It's funny. I was actually queen on the chessboard that year.
yeah. Funny how
Um,
that happens.
but and then we had a small I had a small fight where I attacked a member of the other side of the board, came back and then challenged the leader on my side, and then we went at it like two big gruff guys just throwing everything to the wind and wrestling.
Yeah,
Um, now
that
there
was
was
the.
this
Go ahead.
there was something from that year that I could never reproduce, and I wish I could have because I had no idea what was going on, and that is when um, I screamed at him, and as I went to run during rehearsals, I threw my horn that I was doing the call with, and I nailed you right in the chest next to next to the keep. Had
Yeah,
no idea I did it.
yeah. I didn't really feel anything, which is it's so I didn't even have the suede tabard back then, but I think I was just wearing linen that year, or cotton. I just kind of looked like a giant turd. Everything was brown and off color of brown, but I didn't even feel that. It was just like a boop. I'm like, oh, okay.
I think what
That was
threw
funny.
everybody at the point was nobody knew we were going to do it because it had come so close to the time that we had to do it that both of us had decided we're going to do it and see what happens to everybody because that's exactly the kind of response we wanted from the cast. We didn't want anybody to know it was coming. And it was incredible to watch the people on the board either out of fear and panic or out of good acting. I'll take one of any of those three, if not all.
Yeah.
I remember Mongoose. I saw her out of the corner of my eye, and Mongoose is a small statured female. I remember watching her as she realized I was bum rushing the leader, went to turn sideways, and because she slipped a little bit, went to all fours and basically went off the board on all fours. which was hilarious as
Yeah,
everybody else panicked.
those are the moments that I like, that I feel like we should do more often. There was one in King Arthur Year, same person that you fought the director, and then after the fight, just every now and then, they would get into like a legit scuffle, or so it would seem, and didn't tell anybody. Those are the moments where even if the cast doesn't know what's going on, is my favorite because it makes it real. It makes it almost as if it's a legitimate fight, like wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
Think of I don't really do wrestling, but Bret Hart and the Attitude Era, or he was before then. He started the Attitude Era, but his thing with Shawn Michaels, which is probably the most I know about, and I mean that was legit, but it's still it's still wrestling. It's still what we do, which is performance combat. There are moments in those shows where, I mean, they're people. They're people like us. They could just flip out if they want, and oftentimes during that era they did, and you just had to go with it, and it made it so much more real. And I think those scenarios in our show make what we do so much better and more real because people come to our show frequently. They see. It's not like the YouTube show that I did and will obviously continue to some degree when I back down in January or so. But people repeatedly come to the fair and watch the chess match, the joust, etc. And it's the same show every time. And it's like, for me, I don't go to shows like what we do. I may do like one visit to Bay Area, although I'm more interested in the shopping perspective of it
Well,
than the
there's
fight.
nowhere else in the nearby area that has the kind of layout for shopping that
Yeah,
Bay Area does.
yeah.
They have such a huge amount of vendors that just you couldn't go to two or three fairs of the same type in our state and
Hmm.
find that.
Yeah. But yeah, I like Bay Area for the vendors. Our show, obviously, I'm doing the show, so I'm not really. I mean, I know the vendors that we do, but it's smaller. It's a smaller show. But anyway, my point is, these moments I feel like help change things up, help make the show fresher. A kind of weird story. The year that I was King Alfred, and we had the outside Vikings. We had two groups, but the one that was on the board, um, they were very involved. Whether they should have been or not is not really privy to me. I don't care. I don't really particularly delve into the behind the scenes unless I have to. Um, but we're all theater people. People talk. People complain. There's a lot of catty people on cast, and I used to be one of them. And I've kind of become the old cat now, where I just want to sit down and eat catnip.
Well, at least you're still a cat. I'm pretty much
Yeah.
termed as village elder at this point.
Mhm. Uh, we won't get into the Cats movie, but anyway, um,
Nobody
uh,
should.
yeah, no, I'll be honest. The things that they did, aside from things that they did that actually did interrupt us, um, which was a couple things. I can go over one in my mind, but it's not my fight. It's not my call because they went with it. But literally, all I think of like two things maybe. I kind of enjoyed what they did because, in all honesty, having our people and their people in the crowd riled up legitimately excites me. That makes it real to me. That makes it easier to act. It makes it easier to be in the moment. It makes it easier to make what we're doing, the emotions, the body language, everything to just come through and just indulge in who we are and who we're supposed to be, and create something that is a memorable moment for us to tell like we're doing now. And then of course for the crowds to remember, because remember the year we lit, quote unquote, lit the keep on fire, which I don't think we ever did a better year than that in terms of a spectacle. But that was probably the most choreographed thing that was amazing that we've done. But all these little moments that are not rehearsed, that are just kind of like, oh, tee hee hee, it's last day, I'm gonna do this. I think honestly, I like those moments more than just the choreography we do, because the choreography gets kind of stale, in my opinion, because we do it for like 3 months, right? We do it for all of June, for every weekend, twice a weekend, and that stuff. My last fight in 2019 with my two amazingly talented women fighters, but I fought two women. Um, they absolutely carried me through that fight because I was like 170 pounds and was stupid and wore a lot of gear in the heat. And
Mhm.
over the course of the show, I just kind of like just stripped all of my clothing until all I was wearing was cloth. Uh, but
Can I
there
make a
was
sidebar to that?
yeah,
All right. You know how I've always been. If you're going to wear armor for the show, you wear armor through rehearsals. You get
yeah,
used to it, especially in the heat that we're dealing with. As many times as I've joked that it's a balmy 30 degrees here in, in in the Florida province of England, it's not. It's literally 98 degrees in the shade.
yeah. And
And
it's only cool maybe 2 weekends in Florida for the show that we do, if that.
and you will overheat. But by starting out, even if you only wear it for a short period of time, starting out in it, getting used to it, these are things that, especially in a choreographed fight, uh, you have to be able to wear these things. You have to know because your body moves differently,
Yeah,
absolutely moves differently. Uh, the armor I wore for my very first year, I wore for my second year, were the same. And the restriction on my upper torso, if I was wearing the arm pieces, the restriction on those, I had I had the cops, which is the section on the arm that covers the elbow. It was the only piece of that was made out of metal, and it would catch at times, so I couldn't knock my arm down if I unless I actually pushed hard. And at one point in time, I snapped the leather binding that was going around my upper arm uh, bicep, trying to get my arm down so I wouldn't injure my fight partner at the time. It was it was hell, and if I had not have been prepared for that, things would have gone much worse. So,
for me in 2019, it was just a mix of being completely out of shape
round
and
is a shape.
exactly, I was very apple shaped. I mean, people say otherwise, but I was 170. I'm small, so you know, don't at me. I was out of shape. Um, I'm actually now, I've lost 20 pounds from that, so I'm now, as of literally yesterday, 150. But it was a mixture of that, the heat, wearing a gaudy suede tabard that is in no way, shape, or form historically accurate. Which I got a new one because I had stabbed myself. Literally, the year that I bought it, literally maybe like a month after I bought it, I have a Vikings X, which is my favorite weapon because it's a BKS, Baltimore Knife and Steel, or sword, whichever they want to be called. Um, and just the weapons we use, some people dull them, a few people dull them. The people that are told to and listen dull them. I do not. Mainly because my sword is dull, and it's actually historically accurately dull. Medieval swords didn't really begin to sharpen until chainmail became a thing, and you had to get into the chainmail. But yeah, no, I was dumb. For some reason, stabbed myself with my dagger, and that created a fissure in the fabric, so I had to buy a new one. But that thing is glorious looking, absolutely gothically black, but it's very thick leather, and in Florida heat, it just, for the amount of exercise I was doing in that fight, I was one person like yourself fighting two people, running all over the board, doing this and that. So at some point, I realized I just need to wear cloth. And I also was using a leather book as a weapon because I was the preacher, so it was like the Bible. And at first, I'd pull the Bible out from my belt. You know, I would go to a point where I'd literally run into a spear. And it's like, that should have killed you. I'd pull the book out. Ooh, having a bit. I pull the book out and have a little gimmick. But at some point, it just kept falling out. And I'm just like, you know what? Why didn't I just have someone on the side hand it to me? And I don't know. There's a lot of things we could have done better or differently, and a lot of swerves we have to deal with in our shows. Even in the show that we did for YouTube a while back, which I'll be reposting with commentary to some degree at some point. But in any case, I do want to delve into, of course, your year that you got to be king, which of course is the namesake here on our shield, and the name you are using is the Bruce, Robert the Bruce, which of course
That was a
King Solid.
fantastic year.
It was.
The amount of people that came and got behind the Scots in kilts, which is not historically accurate, kids, especially not at that time period.
Yeah, you would not have been able to discern Edward II and Robert aside from shields.
I'm told that there's a Netflix show that Chris Pine is in that does a pretty good job of having the correct historical wear for Robert the Bruce.
I had to check that out. Of course, I watched Fallen Kingdom and the parody show Norseman.
Oh God.
Although
Yeah.
ironically, the parody is more historically accurate than the actual serious show. But we're divulging. Robert. I mean, there should be a lot to go off of on Robert. Was that a lot easier than Lel and the King of Majorca?
Oh, far easier. The amount of material that was available. I had 4 historical books I read, along with doing some deep diving into the web for information. You actually played one of the characters in his past who I murdered in a church, or murdered your brother in a church while we were there under truce. You were playing
Yeah,
John Common, weren't you?
John Common with the same dialect as Robert Carlyle from
Oh, that's
from the
right.
time. I remember the director's wife, lover, but I pulled myself into this weird long bit that needed to be ended after 2 sentences. But I don't know. I expected someone to stop me. But anyhow, she filmed that and sent it to Robert. Whether it was seen or not, I feel is kind of weird. But yeah, I was John Cummin, who I guess would have otherwise had a claim to the throne. And I was the only Scotsman on Edward II's side, which is kind of like when I was Alfred, having 2 Vikings on my side. But which happened. But so how we'll delve into Alfred a little in relevance to what I'm asking. But how much of him were you able to discern in terms of personality and maybe combat that you were able to also do for you besides adding your own elements?
So there were some interesting points to him. He's actually, I am in direct ancestry of his line, which is great. So I've actually gotten to play 2 historical characters that I can be traced back to, which is William Marshall and Robert the Bruce. So for me, it was kind of it was incredibly cool to be able to try to put myself in my ancestors' shoes, no matter how far removed I may be from it. But it also trying to figure out what was going on politically at the time. Scotland and England were a mess, absolute mess, fighting over bits and scraps. And you basically had someone who was trying to hold together his own country with a lot of people just willing to give it away for the promise of something somewhere else. I imagine it would be much like a guy living in a neighborhood who knows his neighbors and turns around and all of the neighbors who he was cool with are like, we're all moving. And by the way, these new people are moving in and they suck. So, not to mention, you had people enforcing laws that were not necessarily the laws that he believed in. He was also a very interesting fighter. He used strategy and tactics in the areas he fought that the English were not obviously prepared for, and trying to keep together the people he could. I can't even imagine of what kind of chaos that was. Brokering the bargains with who it was necessary with, making the alliances with who it was necessary with, keeping them from reporting on him, and at the same time trying to run what was left of the country. It'd be just absolutely frustrating.
Yeah.
But he cared, whether or not he cared for the country or whether or not he cared for his position. I kind of put those two things to the same idea. He was fighting for everything he'd known, regardless of what happened, and didn't want it to change. He was, and he was a king that fought on battlefields. He wasn't a man who sat in a chair and gave orders for people to dispatch armies. So when he fought a lot of these people, they just were not ready for it. I mean, hell, he rode a pony in through the bogs. A lot of people think he fought with a sword. Fought with a halberd for a lot of his time. So, and an axe.
Speaking of course, historically, I'm not sure. I don't remember which battle. Probably the one we did, but I'm not 100%. But at some point, his axe broke, and of course, at some point in the show, so did yours. Which is kind of a funny callback to that moment.
His axe did break. He actually hit one of the main guys with his axe, and it snapped off. He hit him so hard. The reports of it were pretty funny to read, but we had some issues, if you remember correctly. I was using a completely non-historic axe, by the way, everybody.
Yeah.
But I was using a headman's axe. It was a big, long bearded axe from BKS. And it came on an ash, or at least what was supposed to be an ash hilt. Well, it had to have happened within the first week of us doing rehearsals. It couldn't have been that far in. No, it was second week of rehearsals.
It happened twice. Once in rehearsal and then the actual show.
So we were sitting there talking and discussing in between working on the melees, and one of the directors came up and grabbed the axe and was making a joke and said something and then chucked it into the ground, and when he chucked it into the ground, the shaft snapped off. And he looked at the axe and he looked at me and I looked at him and he looked at the axe and he's like, I'll fix it. And he took it and walked off, and I'm like, oh no, this isn't his fault. It's not his fault. Any of this stuff that happens, nobody can see coming.
Yeah.
So it behaved itself all the way through the rest of the rehearsals. Opening day, I am 7 moves into a 69 to 75 move fight. And I remember coming down on my opposition's shield. The first couple strikes I came in were across his shield, both strikes going one from the right, one to the left. And then I came back and with both hands drugged down the shield. I drug down the shield and then popped forward to push him back with the top of the shield itself. Popped him back. As I did, I brought the axe up. The axe head snapped off at the top of the shaft. Went 10 feet spinning in the air. By the way, did I mention the beard on this axe was pretty close to a foot long? So if it would have come straight down, I'd probably be in a wheelchair sipping from a smoothie cup, or
Yep.
anybody who it would have hit. Went up over my back and landed in the square behind me. So, funny side note to that, in the audience, one of our people who was there to rile up the crowds, one of our actors, was sitting next to two people from an organization, from an organization, a Scottish organization here in town, and they were complaining. One of them was complaining to the other about how this isn't really how the fight went. And as soon as the axe head came off and went spinning up in the air, the guy started screaming, "That's what happened during the fight. That's what happened during the fight." And
Yeah.
she turned around to the guy and said, "Is that real enough for it?" And he's like, "This is awesome." Totally
Yep.
not planned.
Uh,
Totally not planned.
yeah. A moment that we don't want to have happen, which has happened every now and then. But just as I was saying, kind of makes it real for us. Kind of, puts you on edge if you're one of those people who's falling asleep on the sidelines. Which apparently does happen too. Uh, yeah, that era is John Common. But in relation to the question I asked in terms of taking in parts of the actual person, like I think Robert also was a leper, or was that his later years?
Later years,
Yeah,
they
leprosy was kind of a thing
they
then.
thought that that's what he had. That's what he was dying of. Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, like for me, I very strictly went into Alfred wanting to completely embody the person and the best known interpretations of that person rather than what you would think I would do as king, as me and my what people think of me. Uh, so a lot of,
I happen to think you're charming.
uh, but I'm not Prince Charming. I'm Rumpelstiltskin. But so I watched a lot of Fallen Kingdom at that time, which I think was a wonderful interpretation of King Alfred. So a lot of what I did, at least in terms of dialect and his sort of mannerisms, was pretty much lifted from the show. Uh, but also, what I was able to. I'm not really a big fan of medieval history up until I started doing the show, and maybe even then, like 5 years in, uh, things kind of just glossed over me in terms of the history. Oh yeah, yeah, I'll learn everything while we do the show. I did do some reading on Alfred, but I'm also not a big reader. I love reading, but I'm very particular, right? I'm even particular with like movies and shows and stuff. It takes me a while to come around to things. But so a lot of my Alfred knowledge was just Wikipedia. It was taking historians' comments about them, watching documentaries, and people that actually know about the dude from a real legitimate historical setting, listening to them and trying to grasp the scenario that we're doing. But I feel like the way he was described as being a very strict religious individual, also a very strict king, and also very sickly, uh, was kind of very obvious to handle. So the only little things that I kind of included of my own was what people don't realize is a lot of the things that I said out loud to people as this religious figure would have been like Marilyn Manson quotes.
I honestly thought you were brilliant that year.
Yeah, from like Antichrist Superstar and stuff. Yeah, no, I got a lot of compliments. Some people made an effort to try to ruin it for me, but you know what? Who cares? Um, it it really doesn't matter. We all have our own experiences every year, but I did a lot that I don't do normally during show in terms of opening up to people because of doing the show, as you mentioned, as we opened the podcast episode here, really helps you open up. It helps your shell kind of crack. I mean, we still have some people on cast that are still in that shell, and our show, our group, is kind of the only saving grace that they have. But for me, as a person, you know, growing up with my history, it was to use an Alfred term, a godsend. So it really helped me open up. And then at that point, I wanted to sort of help other people that I realized were in their shell and new people come around in a way that I would have. Like some of our people in CAS just kind of want to throw you in cold ice and be like, there you go, do it. But you got to come around to things. So
Well, let's be honest. It is pretty much being thrown in the deep end
it
when you
is,
start out doing this. A lot
especially if
of
you don't know
times,
anybody.
right? And a lot of times, there's there's always been kind of like a pecking order, just like anywhere that you work, or just like school or anything like that. So some people, especially if you happen to be a closed off person, or you're very new to this and you're kind of trying to feel your way out, there's going to be people that you're going to look over and you're going to think to yourself, I can't really relate to those people over there. Like some people who might be in the upper echelon of directorship. Uh, for the longest time, it wasn't a very caring area. Like you didn't like if you were new, you maybe didn't feel like you should go over there and talk to those people. Kind of idea.
Do a quick sidebar from my experience coming in immediately. Now, granted, when I came in and did the show itself, the medieval fair, I had already done a Harry Potter show for Universal with them, and I had already gotten in with someone in the group, and then another person in the group, and then I was approached by the director to do the show, the medieval fair. So I described this, I think, in the podcast with Zach. I pretty much just went along with everything, but from my experience in doing training as a new person for the first 2-3 years, not it really kind of takes 2 or 3 years sometimes, especially if you're only doing one show, to really start to grasp it. But it definitely feels like it is because we have such a small time frame to work with, but it feels like we do 2 weeks or 3 weeks of training, and then you're just expected to be an expert. Which no one, I mean, you're not really expected to be an expert, but you know what I'm saying? You're expected to get it and then to do it well enough to be presentable. And
Right.
that kind of environment for some people isn't really conducive to that comfort level. So I mean, and I get it. You know, we have 3 months to put together a show, and 2 of those months is we have to actually do the show rehearsal part, and then 1 month is the show, right? So we literally only have like 3 weeks to prep people that are new. But even
Well,
still,
and on top of that, because of the nature of it, when it comes to cast itself and the acting portion of it, there's a lot more leeway with that. But you can't, if it comes to the fight cast section, which let me just state that the chessboard is typically about, I don't know, for us at the most, your fight may last 3 minutes. Your fights are typically not supposed to go more than a minute and a half with the fare that we normally do.
yeah,
There are some people whose egos don't allow them to do anything that's not 17 frickin' minutes long. But
like someone, and I won't name names, who had an 8-minute fight.
right.
I wasn't there for that, so I'm not going to knock the fight. I'm just saying as an example, that was a super long fight, and that's history. We won't delve down. But at least one of those people I like. But go ahead, continue.
But it's a sharing environment. We have a very limited time frame to do everything in, and if you don't keep yourself to that time frame, you're hurting the other people technically.
Yeah.
So, anyways, that being taken away, your fight is typically only, you know what, I'm going to say 2 minutes out of the entirety of your day. If you're in a melee, let's add another minute and a half. So that's if you're in one fight in the morning and a melee, then you're in for 3.5 minutes. If you do the melee, which is usually a shorter one towards the end of the day, let's add another, let's just say another minute and a half. So 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So, no, 6 minutes, because my counting is off. 6 minutes. 6 minutes of your day is devoted to that fight cast, is devoted to that section. You entertain all day long. Your acting entertains people all day long. You may not get a chance to touch everybody on the chessboard. You get
But
a
even
bigger
on,
crowd.
even on the chessboard, for if you're not fighting, even if you have a fight, when you're not fighting, that's just acting, is what we're supposed to be doing. Riling up the crowd, riling up our group. Go ahead.
Because the crowd feels from us. If we have an entire back line watching the fight go on in the middle of the board, and we're tired. I tell you, after being in the heat all day, sitting on those sidelines, you're going to be tired. You push yourself, you cheer, you scream, you throw your hands up, you make it so if you are close enough to the sidelines and there's people sitting nearby, get them involved in it. Just look at what's going on. He's going to win. The crowd feeds from you, and I cannot give you in words the experience of when the crowd has latched on. The roar of the crowd and the feel of the people external from you working in conjunction with the people alongside of you.
Yeah.
It's it's palpable. You can feel it. Like it will empower you. A lot of
That,
times when I'm fighting, I can barely hear the crowd because my adrenaline is running and everything is going on at the same time. But
yeah.
when you can feel the crowd, you know you've done something right. It's not because it can be about you all day long. You cannot care about the crowd or anybody like that, and all you're going to be is you. It's only going to be you. But when you prioritize the crowd and allow yourself to enjoy what you make out of it, and the crowd gives you themselves, it's something amazing that happens.
Especially when you're playing a character like yourself, Robert the Bruce, that the people are going to love automatically. Obviously, everybody loves the Scots, Braveheart and so on. For my year, of course, I was the opposite end. I was the quote unquote good side. I was going off against Vikings. So you have to go into that knowing, okay, technically I'm the good side, but I'm the bad guys to the crowd. And it was wonderful, absolutely wonderful, having other Zach just absolutely get all of the attention from the crowds and be able to bask in that. Another first time king, king position, and for me to be able to have that opposition. Um, Obviously, I played that up more when I was a preacher, but that was me personally with the crowd. I loved when I was playing that preacher character, the moments. And generally, I've realized I prefer interacting with the crowd during the fight rather than our people, because our people are told to go along with it, right? If I'm gonna do this, if I'm supposed to come to you, the side, pull a book out from you guys and whatever comment whatever. It I'm looking. I have a squeaky chair. I am looking for the crowd reaction. I'm not looking for the reaction of our people because our people are automated to do something. Whether they do it or not, I don't care, but they're automated. So they're all just machines being like, yay or nay. But the crowd aren't. The crowd is absolute chaos. So if the crowd is on your side or not, you need to milk it and build it. So when I was playing Alfred, I didn't I had very little crowd accompaniment. I could hear that, But I definitely helped pander to helping the Vikings get their absolute heat and pops and high spots of crowd interaction. But going back to the wanting to do more crowd stuff, when I was the preacher in 2019, there's a spot in my fight where I'm like, you know what, I'm going to grab you and I'm going to go to the crowds. Even just talk to the crowds instead of our people during that fight. But I grab my fight partner, who also does, I think I don't want to mess it up, but like judo or something like that. And she taught me a lot of things then. We did a lot of wonderful stuff. But I grab her by the hair, quote unquote, and then I go over to the side of the crowd that is facing the keep. So both of our groups are facing inward, and we're sandwiched between. And I had a bit where I kind of forget the nitty gritty detail of it, but definitely offensive. But I mentioned probably something about women's rights, or would something about paying her sins. How was gonna? She was gonna get punished for her sins for being a woman. It's horrible, but that's what the way the character was. Not who I am as a person, but and I was trying to get like a high five or something, or trying to get like a people in the audience to, hey, should I smack her?
Oh, dude, you got booed so hard. Almost every time you got booed hard.
Yeah, I think I may have just said like a Bible quote or something. I don't know. I know I at least once may have said during that moment, happy shall he be who taketh and dasheth thy little one against a stone, and slap her. Horrible. But then again, remember that's all in character, and I was playing a medieval preacher. But anyway, and particularly villainous. But anywho, yeah, that was awesome. I wish I could have. I mean, if I went into the crowd, I would have been stabbed. But I like those moments of going into the crowd and having them create stuff that we have to interact with, because we do 3 months of improv, and who's going to make you improv better than the audience? So that was a nice little moment in there. Fight overall was one of my favorites. I only had like 5 or 6 fights, so they're all my favorites. But it was a good fan interaction fight. Narrowing it down, the show here. So that was pretty much your experience doing medieval fare. Obviously, you've done other things, other experiences that range from Renaissance and medieval onward, and I've pretty much stuck to the medieval era, but also did some Harry Potter stuff. I think that's pretty much the only other thing I've done besides the show here on YouTube. That was previously posted, which I'll post again. But is there any weapon? Because I definitely wanted to get into this with you specifically, because you have an eclectic number of weapons. Some of us, just like me, because of money, I have a very limited amount of weapons, and 2 of them were gifts. I definitely want to get a BKS next. BKS is my favorite. I've got a Sterling one, which was gifted, and I love it because it was gifted. I can't say I would have bought a Sterling if it wasn't a gift, but that's only because of money. I have my Paul Chen, which was a gift. It was my first sword, and though it's a bit rickety, it still works. It's still in great fighting condition, combat ready. And my Viking Sax, which is a BKS, I love. It's still in perfect condition. It's got rust, but who cares? But I also have a 6-foot staff from another very good friend that is no longer with us, that really, really helped me out with theater as well as doing the show itself. And then I have an axe. Same issue that you had. I used it once. I think I used it when I was John Cutman in Robert the Brute. Yeah.
Yep, you had your hand axe in the sex.
Bruce the Brute. But I think that was the only year I used that, because at some point my axe head came off. And so our good friend, Mutual, who another one of my favorite fights, aside from that weird ending. But which I wasn't even involved in, so I feel bad for Amon. But that's only because of a certain person.
Mhm.
But still, I love that fight too. Um, he fixed it, but as it aged, I don't trust that weapon. I don't trust to use it, so it just kind of hangs on the wall now with the guitars. But I use the guitars, so I've delved into mine uh, because I didn't last episode, and I was going to because we was talking about that. But yours, what is the weapon collection you have that you've kind of gained over the year?
Oh dear Lord. I'm gonna squeak my chair real quick as I turn
Don't
around.
worry.
Hold on. All right. Well, I have a rather decent collection, but I'll just go for the ones that are directly behind me. Obviously, I got the first one that I started out with, which is a stage steel longsword. That thing is the club. You could literally run it over with a car, push it back into shape, and it do what you got to do. Um, Second one I bought was a BKS longsword. It's probably one of the best balanced stage weapons I've ever purchased. I still use it today in training. Uh, it's fantastic. It has served me well. I paid a pretty penny for it, but like you
Yeah,
do with
BKS
BKS.
BKS is expensive, but it at least in my opinion, because there are amazing blacksmiths out there and amazing swords to choose from. But in my experience, at least choosing between my Paul Chen sword and my BKS dagger, I think BKS is probably the best out there. But that's my opinion from my selection. But it's also very light too. But they are expensive. Sorry to interrupt, but go ahead.
That's fine. Um, I'll just go down to BKS since I'm there already. I have a BKS Grossmesser, which I've never used in a fight. It's a great piece. It is heavy. It is, I would say, heavier than the stage steel I have. I have a BKS Zweihander Flamberge, which I have used in both training in actual HEMA combat and also in stage combat. I would have liked to have done more with it, but to be honest, cleaning it and in our weather, it's a lot of work. And I'm
Yeah,
one of the kind of people that the minute a day is over and I step into the house before I take a shower, I clean all of my weapons. That's just how I am, and it's a lot of work. Um, I have a BKS Hesman's axe, which is the one I fought with as Robert the Bruce, and of course I have a Lutel, which I've heard they're not what they used to be anymore. And my direct contact there no longer works for the company, but I have a Lutel Kriegsmesser, which was my primary HEMA training weapon, as well as um, just a fantastic piece of equipment. It is elegant, it is simple, it is made to historical standards, and it's just a fantastic sword. It also looks really scary to most people. And that really gets me how many people think that it's a katana simply because it has a curved blade. And I just kind of look at them and no, no.
yeah,
I also have a hammer. It's basically akin to it's a huge wooden hammer, two-handed that my friend who passed away left to me, along with several other fencing swords that I have in my collection and wall hangers that have been donated over the years that for some reason I just haven't had the wherewithal to go put somewhere out of my sight. But that's just some of the things I'm looking at currently.
I'll have, uh, because as a Lel, I think you wanted to use Kopesh's.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, they're over on the side. That's why I couldn't see them.
Mm.
I used my pirate weapons. I used a set of Kopesh swords made by BKS. One was 19-inch, the other one was 28-inch. I actually built my own back scabbard that held both of them. Which, by the way, back scabbards pain in the ass to get to. don't recommend it. Had hell getting them in and out. Had to actually have somebody reload them after the fights.
Yeah,
So
you see a lot of medieval YouTubers trying to wrestle that, and although it may seem like it's a little bit more to it than that. So I know some people try to find the easiest way about it, but it's
it sounds cool, but
impractical.
when you're using it, it's no. The other one I have is I have a match set. I have a BKS Kraken scimitar, so not scimitar, a cutlass, and a matching would be the equivalent of a Bowie knife with the cutlass or with the Kraken guard on it as well. And
Which ironically is where David Bowie got his name.
I
Just
miss
to
him,
throw that in there, because David Bowie. But go ahead.
but I was listening to him just earlier before we talked.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
I think that's about the end of what's in my current sight range because I can't take the headset. No, headset's not wireless, so I can't walk in the
So
other room.
yeah. The headset I'm using is I have a Yeti, which is wonderful quality, and I keep meaning to use the Yeti, and then I don't. But this I mean, here on the podcast, it's a little weird because of audio I got to adjust, but it actually is pretty good quality as well. It's a I can't take it off, but anywho, it's just a weird little headset as well. But yeah, no, we need to talk more about other things in other episodes like D&D and historical stuff. But
I agree, but we're all out
indeed,
of time, is what you're about to tell me.
indeed, that'll be it for this episode. Here with, of course, from our show, The Bruce, and I, of course, am the host here, NC. At some point, I'll talk again with the War Queen with Chainmail, but this will be the next episode, and the next one will be another deep dive with another fair member. So until then.